Good afternoon. My name is Lexi Lutz, and welcome to Learn How to Develop Your Personal Legal Brand, Part 3. Thank you for joining us today. Today you're in for an inspiring and educational presentation. Today's program really is meant for lawyers seeking to develop or improve their own personal brands with a specific focus on using social media, getting non-lawyers assistance, and in-person networking strategies. This is not a skill that is typically taught as a law school course or really any other academic course. So depending on where you are in your career, we want to make sure that we provide you with a wide range of strategies and mechanisms for you to be able to improve your brand. We're grateful to have two incredible speakers with us today to provide their guidance on developing your brand. So before we dive into this discussion, let's take a moment to introduce our esteemed faculty. First, we have Sara Holtz. Sara is a lawyer and former general counsel and recipient of the ABA's Margaret Brent Award for Lawyers of Achievement. And she has done work to help women lawyers achieve career success, and not only women, also men as well. She's an executive coach and podcast host of the highly rated podcast called Advice to My Younger Me. And she wrote a book entitled Advice to My Younger Me, Career Lessons from 100 Successful Women, which nicely distills mentoring advice from hundreds of women in different industries at the pinnacle of success about what they wish they had known earlier in their careers. Thank you, Sara, for joining us.
Thank you for the lovely introduction.
And last but not least, we have John D. Risvold. John is a partner at the Collins Law Firm, PC in Chicago, where he practices personal injury litigation. John has dedicated his career to fighting those responsible for injuring his clients and focuses his practice on medical negligence, nursing home neglect, and catastrophic personal injury. He spends the majority of his practice helping victims of catastrophic injury obtain justice. Thank you, John, for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
And just so y'all know, of course, this is only the highlight reel of our accomplished panel, and I welcome you to read their full bios online. Quickly, I want to set us up for what you can expect from today's panel. This program will consist of a moderated discussion of how to develop your own personal legal brand. Again, I would like to welcome our distinguished faculty, Sara and John. I'm thrilled you could join us. Welcome. Setting the stage here, before we get too deep into content, first, we are going to focus on the importance of authenticity in personal legal branding. Then we will discuss utilizing social media for both networking and personal branding. Then we'll talk about general young lawyer branding strategies, specifically tailored for young lawyers. And then lastly, we will have actionable takeaways and a quick Q&A session if we have time at the end. All right, so we hear a lot folks talk about the importance of being genuine or authentic, particularly in branding. And John, I'd like to start with you. Can you help our attendees understand exactly what this kind of buzz term of authenticity means and how they can make sure that their own personal legal brands are authentic?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's pretty simple. Be yourself unabashedly. Be unafraid to be yourself. The best example I can think of is this is the most dressed up you're going to see me usually. I'm usually like in a hat and a hoodie or in some sort of nerdy t-shirt. I really liked that everything was by Zoom for so long because I didn't have to put shoes on. That's who I am, right? And I'm always going to be authentically myself. You hear a lot in law school or early in your career to think like a lawyer and act like a lawyer, but no one really tells us what that means. And I've found, especially in my practice, my clients appreciate much more, and so do my partners and my family, that I'm just being myself. I enjoy this practice a lot more because I'm able to just enjoy who I am, my likes, my wants, and really just lean into who I am as a person. I think that when you're actually being yourself, your true self, it takes a lot of confidence, certainly. But once you do it and you sort of get into the groove of not having to put on airs for anybody, and just being the person that you are, you're going to find that your practice is so much more rewarding. Your life is so much more rewarding. And you are going to make more friends. You're going to have just a better time all around. So it's really just being yourself, your true self.
Fantastic. Completely agree. Thank you, John. And moving on, now that we know how to be authentic, which John gave a very concise and simple answer, which is great. Social media, of course, has become an important vehicle for lawyers developing their own personal brands. And so with so many resources and platforms out there on this topic, you seem to have some great strategies to share. So let's go ahead and, like I said earlier, this is into two parts: social media for networking and then social media for personal branding. So if first we could get into social media for branding, John, in your practice, you tend to utilize social media primarily as a tool for networking. So can you elaborate on how you started doing this and how lawyers can network on social media to improve their own personal brands?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a hyper social person. And so when the pandemic happened and we were all at home, I started using, for the first time in my life, social media for its intended purpose. Instead of just making it a highlight reel of my life, I actually started using it to connect with people, especially other lawyers that do what I do across the country, to ask them, how are you handling court closures? How are you helping your clients when there's no way for us to get into a courtroom or to get a hold of people or whatever? And I started slowly building relationships with all these other lawyers just by essentially cold calling them, just sending them messages, reaching out to them, engaging with them. And now, 3 years later, I've built a network of people that I consider friends, some of whom I've never met in person, but I talk to every single day and consider them to be good friends and great mentors, and they're great lawyers. And so I really think that if you sort of shift your focus about social media, it can be horrible at times. It can be sort of that fake highlight reel at times, but if you sort of shift it and make it about using it for its intended purpose, connecting with other people and building relationships, then it's just like any other networking. It's just, you don't have to go anywhere and put a name tag sticker on and try to force conversation. Somebody's going to respond or they're not. The thing that I found is that most people are instantly willing to help, and they're instantly willing to respond, and they're sort of flattered that you would ask to begin with. And then you start to really build friendships and relationships that way. You just have to get over your fear of cold calling. I think one thing that a lot of lawyers, especially in a practice like mine, where I do personal injury work, but anybody who's not in a big firm, but maybe even if you're in a big firm, this is a sales job, really. You have to sell a jury on why your case is right. You have to sell a judge on why they should or shouldn't grant your motion. You've got to sell clients on why they should hire you. And so in any sales job, you're going to cold call. If you want mentors, you need to reach out to them. If you want to build relationships with other lawyers, being proactive and reaching out, social media makes it easy because they're not saying no to your face. There's no loss at all. The only thing that really happens is, oh, they didn't respond to me for a couple of days or at all. Okay, I'll find somebody else. You don't have any risk here at all. It's not like you're at a networking event and you walk up to a circle of people, everybody knows each other except you, and you stand there quietly waiting for some way to break into the circle, and you never really can. This is just a really easy way, even for somebody who's super extroverted like me. It's a really easy way to get the snowball rolling downhill, and eventually it just picks up so much speed that it's unstoppable. It becomes fun. Like, I used to hate social media, and now I actually enjoy it. And now I've found ways to make it work for my practice and to make new friends and to build new relationships. And so I'm actually using it for what it's for. And that has shifted my whole practice. It's made my practice tremendously better too.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, John. And as a follow-up to that, I know that you said that you use social media, what it's intended to be used for. And, going to your point of, a lot of people use it as a highlight reel, but lawyers specifically for networking, how can young lawyers who maybe aren't used to using social media outside of just kind of posting what they're doing, what are some specific tips as far as, kind of being the number one fan for other people in your networks?
Sure. Find other lawyers that do what you want to do or do what you do, And that's not really that hard these days. And then start following them, start commenting on their wins, celebrate them. When I made partner at my firm, I had more messages from lawyers that I've never met congratulating me than I had from neighbors and friends. It was amazing because I give first. You have to give on social media in order to get. And so if you're out there giving people congratulations, if you're out there celebrating other people's wins, if you're out there looking to lift other people up and turn it into a positive place where it otherwise could be, like you said, a highlight reel or a very negative place, that stands out. It stands out right away because most comments are some sort of something negative, something to troll somebody, something to get a rise out of somebody. But if somebody sees something positive, what an incredible win for your client. What an incredible thing you did. That's awesome. I hope to do that someday. Anything simple like that. You have no idea how impactful that could be to people in their day-to-day life. They will not forget that. It's the Maya Angelou quote that is oft quoted, right? People will always remember the way you made them feel. They may not remember what you said to them. And I'm sure I butchered it, but that's basically the gist of it. They will remember you because you're the positive one. You're the one that's celebrating them. And the same thing goes with content you create too. It's just about giving information freely, giving not advice, careful, but information definitely freely. And the more you can do that, the more you can engage with people in a really positive way and lift them up, it comes back to you tenfold every time.
That's great. Yes, and it's always good to see people on social media not being some type of having an extreme opinion or, like you said, trolling, just actually pleasant conversation and compliments. So yes, thank you, John. That's great. And just for the attendees today, just a quick reminder, feel free to, and it looks like we've already gotten a question or two, but please feel free to use the Q&A to ask questions, and we will make sure that those get addressed if we have enough time at the end, which I expect that we will. All right, so we touched on social media strategies for networking. John, you gave us some great points as far as finding mentors or identifying attorneys that you seek to be like, or maybe a similar practice area. So now let's jump into social media for your own personal branding, and maybe this gets more into maybe more of the highlight reel or sharing good news with people as far as things that you've done. But in your practice, you of course use social media for your branding as well. So what are some tips that you can share with our attendees today as far as social media for personal branding?
It starts top down, I think. Start with whatever your handle is. I'll use Instagram for an example because it's been the most effective for me because it's the easiest to communicate with other people. And it's the easiest to sort of quickly post and then get back to your life or your job. Start with whatever you do and then add your name. So anywhere you'll find me, it'll be Riz, because no one can ever really pronounce my name. So it'll be Riz Injury Lawyer. That's it. Everybody instantly knows what I do when they see a comment from me. Everybody knows what I'm about when they see my name right off the bat. Beyond that, tell people what you do. Use the biography section and tell people what you do quickly and succinctly. When it comes to branding and content and everything else, it goes back to authenticity. So you'll see that I won a trial or I settled a case for X amount and hurrah. And then you'll see my 18-month-old, doing something hilarious, or you'll see my 6 and 7-year-old at soccer, or my wife and I at an event or date night or whatever it is. People want to hire people that they know, like, and trust. And you can use social media to allow people to know you to a certain degree, begin to like you, and then definitely the trust comes. And you can do it just by, again, being yourself. So my social media is not just a highlight reel of awards won or a trial won or settlement or whatever it is, or a check or any of that stuff. Every now and again, sure, when it's something I'm especially proud of. But I think the authenticity is I post it because I'm proud of a certain aspect of it, not because there's a dollar value associated with it. The best example I can think of is I handed a check to a client recently, and he told me, this is going to let me finally buy a house. And I posted that because that's exactly why I do what I do, and exactly why I love what I do. And the reaction was largely very, very positive. And then 12 hours later, I'm back to posting pictures of my kids pretend in a diaper box, pretending they're roller coasters at Disney World. That sort of stuff is real. I think people like you pulling back the curtain a little bit. Everyone thinks of lawyers sort of in two ways, I think, because I grew up in a family of educators, law enforcement officers, and salespeople. No lawyers in my family. And lawyers were either people to be distrusted, people you should not trust, like lawyers like me, personal injury lawyers, lawyers you shouldn't trust, or they were, corporate lawyers, buttoned up, sharp suit, dressed to the nines. And I think that, in this day and age, people are more interested in learning who you actually are than seeing whether or not you're going to be a caricature. I'm not a billboard lawyer. Those lawyers call me when they need a lawyer, but I'm not going to be that caricature. And I think the same can be true for being in a gigantic law firm. I've worked in those firms, and they're great places to learn. They're great places to build a career, but you also have to remember not to lose yourself to them. And so using social media to sort of pull back the curtain to who you really are and what you enjoy and what your likes are, while at the same time, I think, sprinkling in your work. I don't think anyone wants to see someone's social media and it's just like you're at work with them. That doesn't sound like a whole lot of fun. But if you can actually use it to show people who you are and then sprinkle in a little work, then it works to your benefit.
Yes, I love that, John, about the putting a story behind a settlement, because I feel like, especially in your specific case, and lawyers like you, I feel like we see a lot of billboards and wins with X millions of dollars settlement, but when there's a story behind it, back to the Maya Angelou quote that you shared, what kind of impact did this have on this person's life? And that's what people will really remember. So yes, absolutely agree. And then now that we have addressed social media strategies, Sara, I'd like to start with you for this one, to discuss kind of general advice for personal branding, specifically when it comes to young lawyers. Sara, your podcast and your book, which I've read, and it is amazing, and I listen to your podcast too, has great tips for young lawyers. And whether you're starting out with your career or you're kind of just realizing exactly what you want to do, or maybe you are hitting your stride in your career and you're kind of at the peak, and you just need more motivation. But as far as anyone who's seeking to develop their personal brand and is kind of new at doing that, what would you've obviously interviewed hundreds of women, and so what have you taken away from that, and then also your own advice for personal branding for young lawyers?
Great. So I look at the issue of how you develop your personal brand as really a 4-step process. So the first one is that you define your vision of what success is for you. And I'm going to go back and talk about each of these in much more detail. The second step is to identify what your unique strengths are. The third is to distill what you want to do and what you are particularly good at. And that's sort of a meshing of step 1 and step 2. And then the final step, and this is the one where a lot of people have difficulty, is to consistently showcase your brand so that it becomes just integral to how people think about you. So let me go back and talk about each of these steps. So the first step about defining your vision of success. Think about what you want your practice to look like, because you want to make sure that the personal brand that you're developing at the same time that you're growing in your practice is consistent with the practice which you ultimately want. So it's not about how many followers on LinkedIn or Twitter you have. It's about how many followers you have that will help you achieve the career that you want. So there needs to be this connection between what brand you're developing and how that's going to impact and bolster your career. So a couple of comments on that. You want to be sure that your version of success is your version and not others, because throughout your career and long before your career started, there were people giving you messages about what you should want in your career. And those are not always consistent with what you do want in your career. Your parents may tell you that the best job for you is the one that's going to make the most money, but that may not resonate with you. Or other people may tell you that the best job for you is, climbing the corporate ladder and being in a position that is relatively secure. That's hard these days, but but if that's not what really energizes you and what you can imagine loving, as John has talked so much about his job, that really doesn't make sense that you should be pursuing that career. So that's a really important thing, because I think, even at my stage in my career and life, I have this little voice in my head that sometimes my parents or, a professor I had or one of my friends or whatever, that says to me, what you should want is X, even though it doesn't actually feel, going back to our original discussion of authenticity, it doesn't feel authentic. So let me say that for those of you who are particularly young lawyers and at the beginning of your career, what you want out of your career may not yet be clear to you, because you basically have to experience some of these things. When I graduated from law school, I thought I wanted to be a litigator. But once I began seeing what the life of a litigator was like, John's about to get on an airplane, and the notion that you never knew what today or tomorrow would bring. You put on your calendar 2 months, holding it for a trial, and then on the eve of trial, the case settles, and now you have an empty calendar for 2 months. Turned out that actually isn't consistent with the life that I want to lead. And so I actually had to experience that to actually figure out that, even though I love the idea of, appearing in court and the big win and all of those things, and putting together the puzzle and being a storyteller, the reality of the life of a litigator was very different than what my kind of image of it was. So first of all, don't be too hard on yourself if you don't yet have a clear vision of what you want your career to look like, because you may need to experience a few bumps in the road to realize what it is that you want and don't want. The second thing I would say is, regardless of what position you are at in your career, is you really want to pay attention as you go through life. Too often, we are either too stressed out to pay attention to what happens, or kind of a little oblivious to it. And so I'm going to give you some examples of that, which is when I started to pay attention, I discovered when I was engaged and when I wasn't. And so for me, I am always engaged when I'm in front of an audience. Thank you, Lexi, for giving me this opportunity. And there are times when I am not engaged. And that has to do with when my work involves technology, not my strength by any means, or when it requires lots of attention to detail. So keep in mind, pay attention to those things that are energizing and those things that are draining to you, because that again filters into how you define your vision of success. And then the final thing I want to say about defining your vision of success is, I think too often we want to have our success be something that we're actually not very good at, but we think we should be. And so I'll give you an example of that. I was the general counsel of a Fortune 500 company and had lawyers who worked for me. And I thought I had achieved the pinnacle of my career because I was managing people, and that the more people I managed, the more successful I was. Well, it turns out that actually I'm not all that great at managing people. I can do it, but it's pretty draining for me. And so I discovered, in the middle of my career, that what I really wanted to do was work with a small group of very talented people who could support me in my work. And when I made that shift from, aspiring to be a manager to being more of a solo contributor supported by lots of trusted allies, made a huge difference in my sense of satisfaction with my career. So that's the first step, define your vision of success. The second step is to identify your strengths, because the truth is, if you're building a brand which is not based on your success, first of all, it's not your strengths. First of all, it's not authentic, but on top of that, it's actually not very persuasive, right? Again, I could try and build a brand that I knew a lot about patent law, but I don't. And frankly, it would be, it would not be a good brand. So in identifying your strengths, I think too often we think that if something is easy for us, if it comes to us naturally, it's not a strength. But that it's actually almost the exact opposite, that the things that come easily to us are actually our strengths. And in my book, I tell this story about the day that I was receiving the Margaret Brent Award, and my adult children were there to support me. And my son said to me, "Hey, Mom, are you nervous?" And I'm like, "Nervous?" And he's like, "Yeah, well, aren't there going to be like 1,000 people in the audience?" And I'm like, "Yeah, if I'm lucky, right?" And he's like, "You're really not nervous?" And I'm like, "I'm really not nervous." I said, "But if the printer broke down when I was trying to print out my comments, let me tell you, that would just send me into, a deep, dark spiral down." So that was, I think that's a good example of, like speaking in front of groups is one of my strengths. My son found that unbelievable because it's not one of his strengths, right? Like he approaches that with a lot of trepidation. So how can you help discover your strength? Well, the first one is, as I said, to pay attention to when you're engaged, because generally speaking, when you're engaged, it's because you are doing things that require a strength that you have. The second thing is to pay attention to what do people compliment you on? Because again, oftentimes our strengths are invisible to us, but they're not invisible to the world out there. Think about your wins. Like John was talking about the cases that he had won, or the checks that he had been able to give to clients. I think it's valuable when you're trying to focus on your strengths to reflect on what of your strengths actually contributed to your wins. So I'm just guessing, because John has talked about himself as being an extrovert in sales, that among his strengths are connecting with people, coming up with strategies about how to engage people, all of those kinds of things. So you want to think about, when have you been really successful? When has somebody said to you, "Wow, that article that you wrote was really great," or "that brief that you really wrote was great"? What is it that you brought to that made that project so successful? Another thing I have found very valuable in helping me develop my personal brand were personality assessments like StrengthsFinder or whatever. They're really a great place to start to hone in on, first of all, how broad the number of strengths are, and finally, what yours might be. And sometimes it's surprising when you do those assessments to find out the things you thought you were going to come really out really highly on are not actually the things that you come out so highly on. And then the final one, and this one, I have to tell you, when I've done it with my clients, everybody has been like very reluctant at the beginning and then really happy that they did it at the end. And that is to reach out to other people and ask them, "What do you see as my strengths?" And here's just a little tip. You can use this program as an excuse, because it is awkward to look like you're fishing for compliments, but reframe it and say, "I'm just trying to discover where I can have the most impact with my work." And that is the kind of prelude that might make it a little more comfortable is to say, hey, I just watched this, participated in this seminar that the ABA did on branding. And one of the things that the speaker said to me was to ask other people about my strengths. This is a little bit awkward, but what do you see as my strengths? Okay, so that's step 2, identifying your strengths. The third step is really distilling what you've learned in 1 and 2, because this is the basis for your brand. It's what you want to do and what you're particularly good at. Those are really the basis for your brand. So let me give you some examples of things you might come up with. Through the process of both focusing on your strengths and defining your vision of success, you might come up with, oh, I'm a very collaborative person. Or one of the things that you might come up with is, I have a background in accounting. I bet you that could be really valuable in certain kinds of cases. Or you are a fierce advocate for your clients. That can be a great positive. And not all people are that. Some people are much more collegial, collaborative, whatever. Let's say one of your strengths is you are really good at developing budgets for legal matters, something clients care about a lot. Or maybe you have expertise in the transportation industry, or you really know the judges in your jurisdiction well because you clerk there and you've been involved in some judicial projects and whatever. So all of these things are things which can be part of your brand. And are a combination of what you want to do and what you're particularly good at. One thing I'd like to focus on is that in developing your personal brand, you need to focus on those things which distinguish you from other good lawyers, because there's lots of good lawyers out there. Now, I don't mean to say that you have to be unique. I just mean that it distinguishes you from other lawyers. So, John talked a little bit about some of the kind of negative perceptions that people have about lawyers. Well, to the extent that, you embody none of those negative qualities, that's something which distinguishes you from at least the common perception about what lawyers are like. The other thing I'd like to stress is that the more you can develop a niche in your practice, the more impactful your brand is going to be. I used to always have a phrase I used when I worked with my clients, which is there's riches in niches. There's a big difference between saying I'm a labor and employment lawyer and saying I'm a lawyer who focuses on wage and hour class action suits, because there's lots of employment lawyers out there, and there's certainly a myriad of employment issues that are out there. And if it's hard to have what I call share of mind, which is how people remember you when you're in a very generic space. And on the other hand, like you'll notice in John's bio, I thought it was interesting that he talks about being a personal injury lawyer, but then he talks about, nursing home abuse, which is a much smaller part of the practice than saying that you're a personal injury lawyer. And so, what I will remember about John is that those areas in which he worked, which he defined as niches, probably much more than he's a personal injury lawyer. I know lots of other personal injury lawyers, but this notion about, he handles cases involving nursing home abuse. If I ever encounter a situation like that, or somebody who has a situation like that, he's going to come to mind. And then finally, I want to talk about consistently showcasing your brand. So it's one thing to develop a brand, and it's another thing to actually have the world know what that brand is. So at first, I suggest that you develop your visibility toolkit. And by that, I mean stories which illustrate your brand. So John was talking about the fact that he really wants to humanize the kind of work that he does. And his story about, with this check, I'm going to finally be able to buy a house, like that's a great story, right? And it does support his brand of the fact that what he does is really help people, like real people help who have real issues. And so I suggest you start developing stories, and you'll notice that story, I don't know how long it took John to tell us, maybe 10 seconds, right? So stories don't have to be long, involved things. They can be very pithy, as was his example, but they really can land and support your brand. The other thing I would say is keep track of the compliments that you have gotten on your brand in the past, and, you know, try and weave them into those stories or other things that come along. Another tip I have about making your brand visible is to show up consistently with how you want to be known. Okay. And so I'm going to say that, again, going back to John's point about showing up in barefoot when that was a possibility, is he was showing up consistently with what his brand is, right? Whereas, and I'm just intuiting this, John, but the times when you have to put on a suit and a tie and well-polished shoes, those are kind of rub a little bit wrong. You're kind of in a costume. It's not consistent with your brand. You do it because it's the appropriate way to respond or to show up in a certain situation, but it's not necessarily consistent with your brand. Is that a fair point, John?
Absolutely. I can't wear hoodies to court as much as I'd
right,
like to.
Right.
But
so
yeah.
Let's say that you want to show up with somebody who is really adept at building consensus, because that's great quality in a lawyer, right? Well, if that's the case, you know, as much as you can showcase to the world that that's what you do, you actually do build consensus and demonstrate it to them in situations like could be as simple as when people are deciding on a restaurant and people have very different views about what they, you know, somebody wants to go to the fast food restaurant, somebody wants to go to a white tablecloth restaurant. If there's a way that you can, in the way you show up, show that you're really good at hearing everybody's needs and coming up with a good solution, that can be a way that you show up consistent with your brand, assuming that your brand is, you know, somebody who is able to build consistency, able to build consensus well. And, you know, if you, part of your brand, and this is true for some lawyers, is that they're creative problem solvers. They come up with settlements that are completely outside the box. Well, the more you can show that you solve problems creatively, you know, with out of the box thinking in your interactions with people, the more likely that it's going to really sink in that that's who you are and what your brand is. The final thing is that you want to look for opportunities that allow you to showcase your brand. You know, let's say you're, again, we're going to go back to the person who builds consensus well. Think about, you know, what kinds of opportunities can you volunteer for that will build your credibility? And like one of the examples would be like, maybe you could become a volunteer mediator, which would be a way to show that, you know, this is something you do often and you do it well. Those are the 4 steps, just to go through them again. Define your vision of success, identify your strengths, distill what you want to do and what you're particularly good at into a brand statement. And then finally, to consistently showcase your brand, like not just in your resumes, but how you actually show up in the world. So I think that's it.
Yes, thank you, Sarah. That's so great. And I love how the first 3 steps have to do with envisioning and clarifying and specifying exactly what you want your brand to be. And then the last step is to execute, because I feel like a lot of times, and I'm guilty of this, sometimes young lawyers can think, oh, well, if I just put something out there, that'll be my brand now. And, you know, there's so much more thought and planning that has to go into it before you execute. And that's great. And your book also has a lot of planning tools, and it's very interactive. And so, you know, to those of you who might feel uncomfortable asking mentors or people you work with, you know, about your strengths, another resource other than referring to this is Sarah's book. And you can say, hey, I have to fill out this workbook of my strengths for this book that I'm reading. And, you know, that's a great way to also throw that in the conversation if you're awkward like I am. So thank you, Sara.
Well, and
Lexi,
thank
I don't
you.
want to interrupt. I need to know where I can get this book because I'm the father of a daughter. My wife is a very successful professional, so I want to know where I can get this and
So
get it.
there's the book.
After I read
Thank you. By the way, that I appreciate the slow pitch from both of you.
This was not planned, everyone.
No, I just see it in the background, and I know that I just took like 4 pages of notes
It was great.
unexpectedly. This is great. I gotta get my pen out. And so
well,
now I need the book.
I think Lexi's going to ask us about our brand. I want you to hold on to your observation about that because that is actually part of my brand. It's available on Amazon. So in ebook form, in printed form, it's a pretty quick read. In the old days when people were traveling a lot, I used to say, it's definitely digestible in a flight across the country or whatever. You'll be from start to finish. So thank you very much for the shout out. Appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, Sara. Yep, and you must be psychic or something, Sara, because John, I'll start with you for kind of one of our follow-up questions on the personal branding. How would you define your own brand if you had to in 3 to 5 words?
I am a laid-back, nerdy personal injury lawyer ready to help at a moment's notice.
Love that. Sara, what about you?
Well, I'm not as concise as John, but I would say the first thing is that I am committed to women's success in the workplace, particularly lawyers and particularly around the issues of business development. I am a curious questioner and a good listener. I give, and this is where I appreciate John's shout out on this. I give practical, actionable advice. And I hope people will feel that I am a good presenter. And finally, that I have a proven track record and lots of experience in helping women succeed in the workplace.
That's great. I agree with all that.
Thank you.
And next question is, how often have you, and Sara, we'll start with you for this one, have you obtained an opportunity in your career or an extracurricular activity solely because of your personal brand or reputation?
Well, it's a great question, Lexi, because I would say that at the earlier part of my career, not so much when I was a lawyer, but when I started my business coaching and training women lawyers in business development, I did all the things that are, the approved things. I wrote and I spoke. But the reality is, and I came to this later in life than I would have hoped, was that virtually all of my business came from referrals, from people who had worked with me or whatever. And so I would say that my brand is there. I would not have a career if it were not for my brand, because that's what people are referring based on. Like, I took her program, and as a result of this, my book of business is 3 times larger than it was when I started, right? That's the kinds of things that people say about me. And they say, I'm just thinking about things that people have said that, oh, she's not your run-of-the-mill business development consultant. The stuff that she talks about it from her experience, and she talks about it in ways that I can act on, right? So basically, I would say virtually all of my business, all of my career is based on my personal brand.
Absolutely. That's awesome. John, what about you?
Yeah, it's the same. I second that. I am a partner in this law firm because through my wife, I met an estate planning lawyer. And like I said, there's no lawyers in my family. There's no connection, nothing. I had a high school teacher who told me I would be good at this. And that just stuck in my head. And then I went and did it. And then I came out, coming into my 3rd year of law school, and I knew, hey, I'm good at my trial and I'm great in the courtroom. I really enjoy this. How do I do that? And so she's my girlfriend at the time, but now wife, introduced me to a family friend who said, oh, you want to try cases? Well, I got to introduce you to Sean Collins and Ed Mansky, who are now my law partners. And I met them as a 2nd year law student. And I just, kept in touch with them, kept building that mentor relationship. and then was able to join the firm 6 years ago. And when it comes to business, it's the same deal. The two best referral sources I have, the most consistent ones, are a doctor that lives in our general area, who honestly we met online first, or I met him in person. And the other one is a lawyer who doesn't even live in Illinois, but ends up getting a lot of business here, and doesn't have anywhere to send it. So sends it to me because we're friends and we've gotten to know each other. And so that's just because of how I've built my brand. My brand is going to be the person who builds relationships, the person who's genuine and authentic. I'm not, like I think all of us have said, I'm not certainly the caricature of a lawyer. I'm not what people expect. You know, most people expect Harvey Specter, and that's not me. I'm not a TV lawyer, but I am a real person. I'm actually pretty good at sales. And that's really how I built it out, is I've got to sell myself to referral sources, to mentors, to people in my firm, to my clients. And it works because people know that I'm being real. I'm not trying to sell them a bill of goods. I'm trying to convince them to work with me to get, you know, a common goal accomplished. And I think that has paid dividends time and again. And all of my business, all the business that I bring to the firm, it all comes from referrals, 100% of it. And it's all people I've met in the community, friends, former clients, other lawyers, doctors, whoever, that have either heard that I'm somebody that they should trust, or know me or know of our firm generally, and know that, you know, we're the go-to. You asked about my personal brand. If I'm talking to other lawyers, what I tell other lawyers is I'm the lawyer that the billboard lawyers call when they need somebody to actually set foot in the courtroom. And it's true, because a lot of our work, and Sarah, you pointed it out, it's deliberate that I niche down, because a lot of our work comes from other personal injury lawyers that don't do med mal work. They don't do nursing home work because it's just not their niche. It's not their forte. And we get a lot of cases and a lot of referrals that way, simply because we do that work. And so the specificity is important, but genuineness, not authenticity, is the thing I keep coming back to, because I think, especially not having any familial connection to the law, you know, I treat it like a sales job, and I'm just being my real self, and I don't hesitate to say that. And I think that people can tell when you're being real and when you're faking it. They really can. And you know, you always want to work with the genuine people.
Lexi, I want to just highlight something that John said, reiterate it. He used the word sales a number of times. And in my experience, a lot of lawyers have a lot of reluctance about selling. And I want to, you know, put in bold and underline that you can recount it any way you want. One of the, you know, I talk about educating people about what you do and how well you do it as opposed to sales. But I think it's really important that we embrace it. And, you know, I think it has to be a very conscious decision to embrace the concept that you are out, quote, selling, because that isn't why most of us went to law school. If we had wanted to be in sales, we would have, you know, gone into communications or some other kind of thing. And so our natural instinct is to be reluctant to view ourselves as people who are in sales. So find a different word, but do the action.
Yeah, my grandfather it sticks in my head. He started saying this to us when we were really little. Everything you see is sales. Yes. And it is. It is. You're right. It's different words for the same thing. Persuading a jury and persuading a judge, it's a sales job.
Right.
You know? And so you're right. And that's, you know, that's really what I've found to be something that fits well with my brand and fits well with my practice, is treating it like that.
Great.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you both. That's very insightful. And then John, we'll start with you for this one. As for personal legal branding, we've talked a lot about personal branding and making sure that your unique, authentic brand is coming out, what you want to portray, and also a combination of that and what your unique skill set is. But how much emphasis should attorneys, young attorneys, be placing on the reputation of their law schools and or law firms or companies?
I think law firm reputation is very, very important. Your personal reputation in the community is very important. The legal community across the country, but especially wherever you are practicing, is way, way smaller than you think it is. People will learn very quickly whether you are somebody to trust, whether you're a person of your word, whether you are reliable and responsible. So I think that in practice certainly is very important, your own personal reputation and the reputation of those that you choose to surround yourself with. In terms of law school, I don't know. I went to a middle of the road law school because it was cheap and I didn't want to have a whole lot of debt. And I don't think I've had a single client ever ask me where I went to law school. They don't care. In my line of work, they don't care. They just want help.
Right.
But it's definitely different for different practices or different areas. Like, I'm sure that anybody who went to a very, very good law school could rely on the network from that law school or the reputation of that law school to help further their reputation. So I think use all the tools you have to your advantage. All I had was I'm good at talking and I'm good at networking, and I knew what I wanted to do and I knew what I was good at. So that helped me a lot. And now I know that, and I knew it from the beginning, but now I know how important personal reputation is and firm reputation is. So those two for me, certainly. But yeah, if you went to a really, really good, nothing against my law school, and you can Google it later, I won't mention them. But if you went to a really good law school, absolutely leverage everything that you can to get to where you want to be. And it's like Sara said, and I love it. I wrote it down and underlined it. Whatever your version of success is, I'm stealing that and I'm using it forever because it's spectacular. Pull every lever you can to get to your version of success. And, there's no wrong way. It's just the way that works best for you to get to where you want to go.
Great. Sara, what about you?
Well, it's interesting. I think that where you went to law school and what your practice is, or where you are practicing can certainly be part of your brand, but they're not your whole brand by any means. In contrast to John, I will tell you, I went to a law school that some of you may have heard of. I went to Harvard, and I was general counsel of a company, Fortune 500 company. And so I can honestly say that those things have gotten me in the door. There's no question about it. But first of all, if I couldn't deliver on whatever people's assumptions were about those things, they would have done me zero benefit. And the other thing is that I don't, I am fortunate that I have those things in my background. But there's lots of other ways to build your credibility and build your brand than where you went to law school with. And so I would say for anybody who is like, well, I didn't go to Yale, don't worry about it. Exactly as John said, there are so many ways that you can build your brand and you can build your network. And by the way, John, I just want you to know that there's nothing really all that special about the Harvard Law School network. I don't think I've ever had any fellow graduate help me in a way. I certainly used it to get some credibility, but so just for if anybody has a fantasy about that, it hasn't been
Another thing TV lawyers lied to me about. It's just that list, right?
Yeah. So that's, I guess, what I would say is that, there's the way you build your brand is by collecting your stories, by asking for introductions, by asking for opportunities to showcase your skills. Those are all the things that build your brand. And those are all things that require initiative. And that goes back to something we talked about before, which is that really the only way that you can successfully build a brand that is consistent and that is easily recognizable is you have to take the initiative to do it. It's not going to do itself, no matter where you work, where you went to law school, those kinds of things. You really have to take the initiative to make that happen.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sara. And so I want to get, before we run out of time, to some of the questions that we've received. So the first question that we got was, someone said, I understand the male moderator purposely dresses down, but this question is for Lexi and Sara. Do you find that minority attorneys or female attorneys have the same luxury?
You want to
Sara,
go, Lexi?
gosh, I mean, yeah, that's a really deep question. Sara, do you want to take it?
First of all, let me say that anything I would have said about this has been completely erased by the pandemic, right?
Right, exactly.
So I don't even know how people dress anymore. I was on a Zoom call last week with somebody who was in a bathrobe, literally. So, and this was a professional conversation. So I guess what I would say is women and minorities have less latitude in everything than do men. And, dress is probably one of them. And I think you have to be attuned to your environment. To be honest with you, I mean, again, I haven't had this experience, and I certainly was never a trial lawyer, but, I think people still probably show up in suits at court. But frankly, in a lot of places, I think if you showed up in a suit, whether you're a male or female, people would actually respond negatively to it. So again, I wish I had more experience in this post-COVID world. I could easily have answered this question in the pre-COVID world, but in the post-COVID world, I'm not really sure. But I think it is good to keep in mind, unfortunately, that as women and minorities, we definitely walk a tightrope that's a lot narrower than what men can get away with.
Yeah, I agree, Sara. And as a woman and minority, I've pretty much been socialized to always overdress, just because there's some implication that people may take me more seriously, whether or not that's true. But, for me personally, it has existed, and, we could probably do a whole nother webinar on that. But no, I thank you for the question. And then we received another question, and maybe John, this one might be more for you, with respect to personal reputation and client communication. It seems that some attorneys respond as soon as possible, whereas others have more boundaries. This particular attendee deals with insurance reps and doctors more often than not, and clients usually end up asking questions that require this person to dig through the file or do research. So how would you approach communicating with clients in an email-heavy society?
Sure. So let me start with, I'm the absolute wrong person to ask this question to, because I am never not working. I'm always responding to email because I just compulsorily will do it. Otherwise, I'll forget. I flag emails all the time and batch respond to them, if I can't for some reason. But I'm always responding to clients because my clients are people. And every client that I have is a future referral source. They may need me someday, and they need to remember that I'm the person who gave them my personal cell phone number that they could call at 2 a.m. if they needed somebody to come show up at the hospital. But you have to decide within the parameters of what your firm is and what your practice is, and what's required of you. I have the luxury sort of to do this, to do a little bit of what I want because I'm a partner in this firm. So there's a lot more latitude for me. When I was not a partner in the firm, there was a lot less latitude, certainly. But you also have to fit it in with your lifestyle. I have 3 kids, and they're all little. So when we're at a soccer game, I'm not answering email. When we're, having family dinner, I'm not answering email. Those sorts of things. I make a lot of time for my wife and my kids, and make a lot of time for us to all have family time because it's very important to me. But if they understand that the nature of my practice is, if a client calls and it's an emergency, or a client emails me and needs something immediately, I've got to answer it. That's sort of the nature of our business sometimes. I'm just very much need to respond type A kind of person. So fit it into whatever the balance of your life is. I think it's much easier to achieve balance now, or integration rather, now that we've got all this technology.
So I am the right person to ask this question of. And let me say that I think people get in a lot of trouble answering either, I mean, in this, the questioner's question was because I need time to think about it. Truth is, probably most of us need more time to think about things than we may take when we're responding by email. And so I very simply say to people all the time, I think I've done this twice today already, is, you know what, this is a conversation best held over the phone. Can we set something up? Or I would say, you know, this isn't a simple question. I need to take a look at the file. That is actually something that people will respect, not respond negatively to. And, you know, I mean, I use as much email as the next person, but it's interesting because just yesterday I had this encounter. Somebody sent me a list of questions. There were 10 questions they wanted answers to. They were about, you know, a program that I was going to do for their firm. I could have answered each one of those questions by email. As it turns out, that would have been a huge mistake because I actually needed to understand the context of the question before I answered it, because I would have said yes to something that in retrospect, when we started having a conversation about it, I realized would have been absolutely the wrong answer. And so I think there is no negative attached to, you know, this question is more complicated, or this question, I need more context before I can answer this question, or whatever it may be. And in fact, you know, and this is the only place where I've disagreed with John, I would actually be very cautious about having your immediate knee-jerk reaction be to respond by email. It's certainly the easiest thing to do, but I'm not sure it's always the right thing to do.
I agree with that. If you're being asked a question by somebody that requires you to read a document or look through the file or have a much larger context, you know, mine is more what happened in court. When's, you know, did we actually set my deposition? What's going on with my case? And those are 30,000-foot view questions that I can answer by email pretty easily. But Sarah, to your point, it's really important. You're right. Like, people appreciate they appreciate a response. So I think don't just ghost people, but definitely don't feel any pressure to, off the top of your head, have every file memorized. I mean, if you can do that, then good luck. Go count cards in Vegas if you can memorize every file. God, goodness. You're right, though. You'll get in a lot of trouble giving those answers if they're even marginally wrong. So no, that's true. I revised my prior answer. You make a really good point.
You know, the other thing is, oftentimes I used to have clients say to me, well, you know, they called, they want an answer right away. And therefore I need to, you know, respond by email. And I'm like, actually, I'm not sure that people do expect that you want an answer right away. And that who doesn't like a thoughtful response, right? So I guess if I would hope that people would reframe the asking not to answer immediately with an email into, you know, what is really in this situation the best way to respond to this request or comment or whatever.
Great. Well, thank you, Sarah and John. I know that John has to go to a flight. And so, you know, thanks to all the attendees for joining today. And yeah, I hope everyone has a great rest of your day and took away some actionable items that you can go ahead and execute now.
Terrific. And thank you for the opportunity.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah.
And thank you too, Sarah, because I have a ton of actionable things.
Oh, great.
So this
actually,
is great.
you know, can I say one thing? Because Lexi mentioned that actionability is a paramount concern or interest here. Let me tell you what my action item for you is, which is to start paying attention to your strengths. Keep a running list of the compliments you get and pay attention to what energizes you. And that it is on that basis of those things that you're actually going to be able to really articulate your strengths well.
That's got to be really good for your mental health and really good for your confidence as well, though, too.
Absolutely. Right? Absolutely. That's a great add-on, John. Thank you.
Thank you all very much for the opportunity as well.
Yes. All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll catch you next time. Have a good rest of your day.